everyone, welcome back. And to those of you that are just joining us, glad you could make it. I'm Peter Maravellis, and on behalf of City Lights Booksellers and Publishers and the City Lights Foundation, I'd like to welcome you to this celebration of bookstores and bookselling. As always, we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral grounds of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, also known as the San Francisco Bay Area. We'd like to take this moment to offer an acknowledgement and pay our respects. Today, we are happy to be supporting the launch of the new book titled In Praise of Good Bookstores, authored by a man considered by many to be a bookseller's bookseller. I am speaking of Jeff Deutsch. The book is published by Princeton University Press. We continue to raise a toast to that vocation that so many of us know so well and have come to love. Jeff Deutsch has done an exemplary job of articulating the beauty and the importance of bookselling. At a time when great cultural and economic shifts are taking place, it is ever important for a voice like Jeff's to emerge and offer us a forum. I mean, not only reflecting upon what makes a bookstore such a vital part of a community, but offering us kind of an articulation and also a viable vision for the future of bookselling. Our second session today is called The Making of a Good Bookstore: Space, Abundance, and Value. It's going to be moderated by Clancey, Disa, and feature Kim Hooyboer, Alyson Turner, and Paul Yamazaki. Our guests will offer a meditation on the qualities that make a bookstore exceptional. A few words about our speakers. Clancey is the Director of Strategy and Development at Seminary Books in Chicago. She oversees all the marketing, events programming, and the community's engagement, including external partnerships for the Seminary Co-op. Joining Clancey will be Kim Hooyboer. I hope I'm getting that pronunciation right. Okay, thank you. They are the general manager of Third Place Books in Seward Park. Kim co-hosts the industry podcast Drunk Booksellers with Elliott Bay bookseller Emma Nichols. Also joining us is Alyson Turner, the manager for the Source Booksellers in Detroit, Michigan. And last but not least, my colleague, Paul Yamazaki, the chief buyer of City Lights Booksellers. He's been in the trade for 50 years, a lifelong bookstore and independent press advocate. So very honored to have you all here with us today. Before we begin, I want to let everyone know in the audience we're going to be posting links in the chat function of your Zoom dashboard with which you may purchase copies of In Praise of Good Bookstores. We may have time for maybe a couple of little questions, so do drop your questions, comments, praise, into the chat function. So welcome everyone, and take it away, Clancey.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Peter. It's such a delight to be moderating today's panel on the making of a good bookstore: space, abundance, and value. I'd love to really begin our conversation by asking our panelists to share a thought on what makes an exceptional bookstore. And Alyson, I was hopeful you might be able to kick us off.
Oop.
I think, Peter, we might need an unmute.
I think I got it.
Oh, there you go.
Whew. Well, the question is, what do I think what makes a good bookstore? Well, when I go into a bookstore that I'm delighted with, I always can kind of see the variety of offerings, and or it could also be beautiful shelving or something that's just delightful for the eyes when you first go in. But I think we're a nonfiction bookstore, and so we love content, like history and culture. And so whatever the bookstore is supposed to be, it's always good that it's that. If you're a children's bookstore, maybe you have a lot of animals, that you're true to your DNA. And so that you can kind of have an idea of what you may receive as a reader when you're in there. And then, of course, the personality of the the booksellers and of the bookstore comes out in the choices of book.
I love the idea of thinking about variety and content and this kind of DNA. Kim, does any of that resonate with you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the DNA part of it feels so true to me. I remember when I first went to visit my store, which just is about to turn 6 years old. Our company is longer running, but when I first went in the store, the thing that caught me off guard, I guess, if you will, in the most delightful way, was the bestseller list. Because the bestseller list in any bookstore that you go to is going to show you what the staff are just so excited about, and it's going to tell you about the character of the community that is involved in this store's creation. It's such a wonderful collaboration of a display in any bookstore that I just absolutely love. I remember, when I went and visited Third Place, it was 2017, and every single book on the bestseller list was social justice oriented or BIPOC authors. And I was just like, this is the community that I want to serve. This is the community that I can steward. And it really just, it felt like such a good fit. And I think that's that DNA that Alyson was talking about is that combination of the mind of the booksellers and the ethos of the store itself, and the way that the community engages in that, which again, we've got that weird corporate, we're capitalists, it's about what is purchased, and there's that weird dynamic there. And that just is this perfect combination then in the bestseller list. This is what is actually being engaged with. So I think that's the perfect display for me in seeing what makes a community store.
That's so awesome. Yeah, I think we think bestsellers, and sometimes even as buyers of books, the first thing that comes to mind is New York Times lists, or comes to mind are these bigger lists, but they're much more focused. I loved too this kind of this refrain of this is the community I want to steward. And Paul, I'm wondering, thinking of stewardship and thinking about how the age and maturity of City Lights, does that kind of speak to you when you think of what makes an exceptional book space?
Oh, absolutely. I think, for me, why I love visiting indie bookstores is that each one of our stores, the personality and the curation really comes from the staff. And so at City Lights and all the stores I go to, the first place I love going to is where the staff pick. And I love browsing through the shelves and seeing the various kind of staff pick things. And I'm almost amazed by how articulate so many of our colleagues and friends are, and just in how they can get the sense of a book into 2 lines. And so, but for City Lights, I think what we do there, and I think is we have this, we don't think about audience because we have this trust in the reader that's developed over the many decades we've been there, and that we feel that we can take them to places where they might not have thought, where they, just that whole process of discovery and of having that book that you were looking for next to the book that maybe you hadn't thought about. And and I think that's what our role as booksellers, and that's what I always enjoy about going to other people's stores, is because we could take the same 10 books, all our stores, and each one of us would have it kind of displayed differently. And all that is kind of gives me food for thought, and kind of how we display things, and also my own process of discovery as a reader. Yes, I know that book is there someplace at City Lights, but because I saw it prominently in your thing, it made me think about it differently.
That's so, yeah, I feel like that's such a wonderful way of thinking about too, what curation means, and what curation means for reflecting, refracting, and also in the same breath challenging or bringing to audiences new things. And I'd love to hear you each talk a little bit about how you think about that in bookstore spaces, and how you kind of think of when you think of abundance, and we think about the abundance of ideas, right? There are hundreds of thousands of books out there. What are the abundant possibilities that you make possible in your book spaces and those that you look for out in the world.
Well, I'll take that. It's, City Lights is primarily a backlist store. 80% of our sales comes from backlist. And when we do our front list buys, we're thinking about how that book is going to be on our shelves 5 years from now. And just kind of, and so but all of us, no matter how many square feet we have in our stores, whether it's very small or very expansive, none of us have the space for everything that we'd like to have at the same time. And so it's always this kind of being able to change the flow of the store. And so for the careful browser, the store is always changing. You can come in every day. And that's one of the delights as booksellers coming into our spaces every day. We know those shelves are going to be a little bit different than they were the day before. Something sold, something new came in, so that process is always kind of how we shape it. It's backlist for City Lights is always, we take as much pride in that as we do for our front list buying, and I think it's one of the skill sets that I love to talk about the most, and I take great pleasure in doing backlist.
Yeah, Jeff in his book talks about books as part of the as engaging in the conversation with each other and with the customers in the store and with the store itself. And I really love that because I do very much feel like, we can have, again, as Paul is saying, like you can have a book on one display and it'll have a totally different meaning and energy to it than on a different display or on the shelf next to alphabetically, like where it would normally be. The way that we even create our sections in our stores can be so meaningful for a customer. I remember, we fairly early on at Seward Park expanded a lot of our quote unquote studies sections on identity studies. And because I, as a queer person, was like, I don't want to go to the queer section and just see the well of loneliness. I want to see vibrant, energetic contemporary narratives that talk to me and speak to my experience and speak to the history that I wouldn't normally know. And so we expanded all these sections in ways that you wouldn't normally see at a different store. And I think that, again, the way that different stores, even just City Lights has such incredible sections, like very nuanced, quirky names for that you've used to categorize things, and that speaks to the customer in an incredible way. And so even those small decisions of what department category do I put this in, which seems like a very in the weeds metadata thing, has such a huge impact on the experience of the customer and the shopper.
Yeah, I think for us, we have big categories. We have maybe 5 big categories, and then because we added a little bit more space, we have wild edges. My mother calls them wild edges.
I love that.
Fiction is a wild edge. Graphic novels is like a wild edge. But everything else kind of fits because our staff is small. Our store is not very big, so we don't really have the staff to make a lot of differences in history and culture. That's huge, right? You'll find politics in there. Biography is separate, but you can find housing or all kind of things in that larger section, and that's just because of our staff and our size. But if we were much bigger, we would have a one for cats, like a section for cats or something. For sure.
I love our cat section. There's some very good stuff in there right now. There's a great book about authors and their cats. Highly recommend. So
the cover of that is beautiful.
I know, right? Anyway.
No, I love the thinking of, I feel like all of these kind of notes on exceptionalism kind of ring that every book space is exceptional, right? No matter how big, how small, no matter whether you have a cat section or not, but that there's something really valuable in that kind of experience of uniqueness between the spaces. And I'd love to hear a bit about what, as people who so live in bookstores, what it means to be a browser in other bookstores and what it means to kind of be in different book spaces, and how are you inspired, and what do you pick up and take back, or what do you put for, and also in the other direction, what do you give out into the world?
I definitely get in trouble for straightening displays at other stores, so that's what I give back. No, I feel like all of us probably go into stores and are constantly like I go in a store and I feel like I need to explain that I'm a bookseller when I walk in, because I'm about to take a bunch of pictures of their displays. And I'm like, I'm not showrooming, I promise. Like, like I love stealing from other stores because we all steal from each other with such gratitude. And such a sense of collaboration. While each store is so different, we are able to engage with every store that we visit in this really incredible way that I feel is so generous. But yeah, I'm constantly stealing, like taking pictures of books, being like, I'm sure I have this on the shelf at my store. I'm not featuring this. I haven't seen this. It's amazing. Like, if I haven't seen it, then like, my customers aren't seeing it, and I need to put this out there. And that's, we have the ability to use the expertise of independent bookstore or booksellers from around the country. Every time I go into a store, I'm able to like glean little bits of like booksellerness from them and bring that back with me. That cross-pollination, I think, is extraordinarily important.
I think too that the booksellers have been so kind, or the bookstores, when you visit, they're just like, okay, you can take a picture of that little book, or I'll tell you a little bit more. There was one time we went into a store in New York when we were at the BEA, and my mother and I, and we were just looking at this. The children's section was all messed up. Like, it was like really wild. And so our children's section isn't that big. But our teens are separate from the children and stuff like, we do have a separation in that. And the bookstore manager said, but that's most of our profit comes from that messy little corner. And then I got it, it was, so it was like a little lesson, and no one was soliciting, that kind of information, directly, but it was such a gift to get it.
Well, like Kim, I can't help myself when I go into other people's store. The first thing I start doing is starting to kind of like, maybe this needs to be straightened out a little bit, or maybe this. Somebody has got the abe before or after the achebe, and so like I'm going to just kind of but I think you've both hit on really important parts, and I think the thing that I'll stress is the generosity of our community of booksellers and book people. Is like, that I can't think of another endeavor that where information is so freely and graciously shared. I mean, I know my whole career as a bookseller is based off of that generosity, just starting with, just other booksellers, our colleagues in our particular stores, our publishers reps, just kind of how much they bring to us and how much kind of like that that information sharing. I know I'm a lesser bookseller today because I haven't been in other bookstores for 2 years now. And so and I learned so much from just like you both expressed, going into other people's stores and just the pleasure of it. And just kind of, and it's Alberto Manguel in the earlier session said it's difficult to have a conversation, that he found it difficult to have a conversation in the bookstore because he's always so distracted by all the books around in a bookstore. And I feel very similar to that. Just it's the reason why when I'm talking with other booksellers. I like to take them out of the store, take all the time you do to browse through our shelves, but we're going to go next door to the bar to have our conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I love the generosity of the community of book people is so true, and the kind of freely and openly sharing of information, of tips, of tricks, of even just perspective. I'd love to hear like how that maybe for each of you individually has kind of narrated your own careers within bookselling. Like, how has that generosity been a part of becoming a bookseller?
Well, for me, it started with another bookseller. I wouldn't be a bookseller. Francis Oka, who has worked at City Lights at that time, I happened to be incarcerated. I needed to get out of jail a month earlier than the 6-month sentence I was doing. I needed somebody to say that they would employ me. Francis went to Lawrence Ferlinghetti and Shig Brown and explained my situation. So based off of what Francis said to them, they hired me sight unseen. And so 50 years later, here I am. And but I think more importantly though, is that the conversations, when I became buyer at City Lights, we were kind of going through this very difficult transition from being people who love books to trying to be booksellers and all the things that we now think of as, we have to be good small business people as well as people who love to read and love to talk about books. And so I had nobody at City Lights to kind of tell me what the role of a buyer was. And it was the reps and other booksellers who kind of took me by the hand, just kind of, and really kind of taught me how to use my curiosity in a way that's constructive for the stores. And that continues to this day, it's one of the things I love about Winter Institute, where we're all gathered together, and I get as much from the conversations I have in the hallways as well as the formal sessions.
Yeah, it's impossible to follow Paul talking about the generosity of the bookselling community, because Paul's story is legend at this point. But yeah, I mean, I think for all of us, in so many different ways, like as a young bookseller, I started my career at Powell's, and when I had folks who were, my supervisors saw how excited I was and were able to give me opportunities and continue to pique my interest and teach me, about putting the right book in the right person's hand at the right time. And that was taught to me when I worked in a warehouse. I wasn't even working with customers, and that was instilled in me as this is what we are doing, even though we're so separate from it. And I think that sort of that sense of community and business was such an ingrained part of my initial education in bookselling. And from there, I've worked in some of the best bookstores in the country under some of the best owners in the country. And I'm just constantly having these incredible mentors throughout the industry who have been able to shepherd me, and then to be able to do that for other booksellers, whether that's somebody who is working for me or talking to Paul at a Winter Institute bar, or closing down the hotel at one of our regionals. That's such an incredible part of the community. And when we're talking about, again, inventory management systems at 2 a.m, very enthusiastically, and getting yelled at by the hotel staff, stuff like that is it's such an ingrained part of the bookselling experience, and it allows us to bring that sensibility to our bookstores and make sure that they're sustainable going forward for our communities.
I think the collaboration, can you hear me? I think the collaboration with other booksellers and the regionals are really helpful, because you have a feeling like we're in this together, even if it's just the Great Lakes. You sort of have those kind of feelings. the just to collaborate and get new ideas, and even just to say, this is what's going on here. I think a lot of that happened during when the pandemic, when we came under that. There was a lot of, this is what's happening, this is what I'm doing, this is, but that's how we all make it, so we can sell books another day.
Yes.
As they say, amen, it's thinking about there's such value inside of our industry, and there's such, as you all three have commented on, both this idea of stewardship that comes through mentorship, comes through experiencing different stores. I'd love to hear too, like, what is the value to outside of our industry, and like what are the kind of ways that collaboration works there too, especially, all of your bookstores and so many of the bookstores you've referenced are also spaces of community, and spaces, that in many ways are centered on the book, but include so much more. So I just love to hear, like, how does that kind of collaboration work outside of the industry?
Well, I think one example is our main library, the Detroit Public Library. They have authors, they have different authors. At this point, they're virtual authors, but they want to offer the book. So we're right down the street from the main library. So we collaborate with them, saying that, yes, in their Zooms, or, when they're in the auditorium, if they get back in the auditorium, we can, supply books for the readers that want them for those events. And usually we're really excited about their authors. So
yeah, I'm always so grateful for, we have all of these moments of micro change that we get to enact, of I've got a teacher who comes in who's been working with a particular student who needs a very particular book to get them excited about reading and about the world around them. And so just that one book makes such a difference. And then we also, on the other end, like Alyson was saying, we get to provide books for hundreds, if not thousands of people in a single sitting. We, at the beginning of the pandemic, Third Place was able to start doing a Books to Student Fund. And we have given out, gosh, I'm so sorry, Third Place. I should know the number here. It's thousands upon thousands of dollars in books that we've been able to provide through the pandemic, through the lockdown, when schools stopped being able to be open to kids. And even now we're still being able to donate so many things. And so we get all these little micro impacts, and then these macro impacts, and being able to be part of both of those is such a rewarding experience for bookstores. And I think that every single bookstore, regardless of the size, regardless of the amount of outreach we really will do, we have both of both sides of that larger community impact and smaller community impact, and both of them are incredible.
Yeah, Peter Marvellis, our host for this event, is actually the person at City Lights who should actually jump into the conversation and speak to this, because what Peter does curating the events is he mixes such a wealth of both local, national, emerging, unknown, as well as kind of headliners. And it's what Peter does kind of speaks to what he's of a complete community. It's not just kind of what you having the headliners and which we always love to have, because some of these are the authors that we've been reading for many years and admire so much. But to see who is going to be that emerging audience, and how do we create new audiences and new forms of conversation, it is the bookstore as an exchange of ideas, an active space to to foster those collaborations. And just City Lights is fortunate in this and it's our geographical location that we have 3 great bars within stumbling distance, and and those kind of foster that conversation where you have the interaction of spaces. Peter was talking about the alley in between Vesuvio's, which is kind of a legendary bar right next door to us, and they have activated that space during the pandemic to make it a, not only do they have an outside space where they can serve their customers, but they've also made it a community meeting space. We've collaborated with them on certain events. And so it's all these things together that we do. And it's kind of looking, one of the advantages or one of the learning experiences of this whole pandemic is dropping into other people's events, that this kind of technology is made possible. And then there again, kind of that, it's another way of continuing the conversation.
Paul, I'm excited for whenever City Lights decides to put a bar inside the bookstore.
Oh, I don't think that's a good idea. I mean,
I'm very excited for you to do that. I'll be the first in line.
So then we'll just continue to tour the bars around.
Right.
Exactly. Bookstore crawls all the way.
Great patrons. I really appreciate this. And Kim, I'm 100% gonna, generously borrow the idea of micro change and thinking about, what it means for book spaces to interact with, not just schools, but libraries, and to interact with local bars and local businesses, and that kind of interplay is really awesome to making things that otherwise just wouldn't exist, right? These kind of very special moments of engagement. And I wonder, for all 3 of you, how do you sustain that? Like, there's so much work that goes into, just actually being able to make the book available. So we talked about the kind of curatorial specialness of these spaces, but what about these how do you do this and the partnerships? Like, what does the balance look like? And how do you really preserve it, especially considering the challenges of the last 2 years?
Well, I think just to continue this conversation is like, sometimes your partners will take a lot of that load off. Like in our case, there's this anarchist book collective that's been in San Francisco for almost as many decades as City Lights. It's bound together. And they have this incredible program where they get books into incarcerated people. And so all we do is call them up several times a year, and all the galleys and other hurts that we don't, that staff didn't want, or that just all of us have galleys kind of piling up, and just kind of bound together has found this way to get them into various institutions where people are incarcerated. And so to me, it takes so little effort on their part. I can't imagine the level of work it takes on their part, because they have to have relationships with all these various different penal institutions. In the state of California in particular, they're very strict about what comes in and out, and and so somehow they've managed all these relationships, but they've made it very simple for us to do something what we feel very good about it, of getting these books out to an audience that doesn't have access to the books in the way that our customers do, who walk into our doors.
So I think the partnerships are I think the partners do help. I should say that. Just like what Paul was saying, we have we partner with a Lions Club to have a book club for and about the blind and the deaf. And so the Lions Club, because they're Knights of the Blind, they're like, here we go, we're going to get them brailled, or whatever we can't imagine, but we want to, with Detroit Disability Power, expand this availability of information. And so with I think the partners are really, they take a load off. They're really helpful in the way that, they'll help with the, we'll just get the book, and then they'll do other stuff.
Yeah, I think, going back to the bookstore's role as a community space, a lot of that is just saying yes. Obviously, you have to draw lines, at certain points when you're like, I'm too capped out. I just cannot do this. But being known as a store that will say yes to the ridiculous ideas that your community brings you is incredible. We had, before the pandemic, we had 9 separate book clubs meeting just at my store. And we were able to bring 6 of those onto Zoom. But throughout the course of the last 5 years, we've had a bunch of different book clubs where somebody's like, listen, I want to do a book club that is accessibility focused, choreographed dance. And I'm like, okay, great, let's do that. Let's see how it goes. And, it went on for 6 months and they had a blast. And it was a weird thing that we did for a while that brought joy to our community. And I was like, great, nothing, I think there's so much perfectionism that so many of us feel of if I start this program, I need to be able to do it all the way. And I need to, yeah, exactly. And I think that a lot of times allowing ourselves to try something and say, great, I gave that, my community brought this to me. I gave it a shot. We were there when they asked us to be there. And maybe it's not a forever thing, but it's a for right now thing. And I think the pandemic has taught us so much about for right now things, and our ability to say yes to things and allow them to run their course, but be there and be present and be that space. Because that's what our community wants of us, is to be present for them. We didn't sell that many books through the dance one. It was all based on a book each time. It was very fun.
Was it based on a book?
Yeah. So each time the choreographer would actually have would have a choreographed routine prepared based on a book that they had all read together. It was too many components for it to be particularly well received by more than a few folks. But it was fun. It was great. Why not?
I love the idea of, Alyson, please go ahead.
No, I was just reading in the chat. Speaking of books, to purchase copies of In Praise of Good Bookstores, click that link at City Lights. Okay.
Yes. a great bookseller plug. The ideas of experiment and being present are such rich ideas. What are other modes in which your stores, or you've seen other booksellers kind of take up those kind of pillars, especially the experimental one? And Kim, I really appreciated the comment about there's an impulse to have everything together, but sometimes actually just being the space that does this thing can have so much value. So thinking of value, what spaces of value does experiment or being present hold for your stores?
Well, I know for me that, I used to spend a lot of time with display and what went into the windows and all that sort of thing. And then one Monday I came in and the windows were really different. And I took a look at it. I said, because I had always focused on okay, this is many copies of this book, and we're going to make sure that those get out of the windows, And so one of my colleagues had just taken a certain portion of the window, and they only had single copies of these things. They were from smaller literary presses or university presses. And I said, oh, that is really good. And, not only did it turn out to be a good idea, it was a very good commercial. Those books started turning out of the windows, and that became a very active space. And I just let it go. The staff is doing a great job. I do not need to kind of try to be perfectionist about this, or kind of make sure that my fingers in every, and so that was 20 years ago. They still do this. And one of my favorite activities is to come in on when I've been away and to see what's in the windows and see what the staff has done. So yeah, just to like Kim's point, just kind of, there's certain things just to let it go and just kind of and for us, it's been amazing. They do a better job than I was doing.
I think when people come in and they delight or even delight a little bit about how, how the depth of maybe a subject, there's a university press book, there's, a small publisher, there's, maybe a public voice, a big publisher, but it's all about the same thing. And it just, how deep do you want to go? Or like there's a truth to power book is so thick, it's like, here, I'm going to tell you everything that happened from there then to now, something that, you have to take in a lot of time. And we're always delighted. And I think that's very valuable to us and I hope that that's a good service that our bookstore can offer.
Yeah, I think Alyson is so right there. I mean, every single book that we purchase for our stores is an experiment. It's taking a chance on this author and this work and like all of the different people who went into building this one little book that's going to be sitting on the shelves that we're going to invest in. Exactly, that we're going to invest in and every single like, going all the way back to like the curative role of bookstores, like every single time that we bring a book in, that's an experimental investment that we're taking in the author and in our community. And there's, Jeff talks about, there's all these, quote unquote rules for bookstores of like, you keep the book on the shelf for 6 months or something like that. And every time we break that rule, every time that we say, no, I refuse to return this, or like, instead of returning this book, I'm going to just face it out, or I'm going to write a shelf talker because I refuse, every time we do that, that's taking that second leap of faith for that book and for our community.
I love it.
Yeah, that kind of faith, and also that kind of experiment, and also what feels like too a commitment to persevere in some sense, to like really believe in the things that bookstores do, to believe in them, even when they don't result in book sales, or they don't, necessarily fit the kind of nice kind of 6-month period, right? And it also feels so steeped in hope. And so I want to ask 2 things. One, for anyone who's on the Zoom call and has questions for our panelists, please throw them in the chat. It's wonderful to have an abundance of conversation around this. But I'd also like to ask you 3, what makes you particularly hopeful at this moment? We're at such an interesting moment in so many ways, and I can imagine all of our stores are experiencing this moment differently. And so I'd like to hear in the kind of vein of not just abundant thinking, but, thinking beyond the kind of present, to think about, the reverberation of backlist and also the future of all the books to come. What makes you hopeful?
I'll jump in and just say, being on this panel to see this next generation of booksellers makes me incredibly hopeful. It wasn't that long ago that I was standing at a Winter Institute with some of my elderly colleagues, and we were just looking around, and this was before all of you showed up, and just kind of like, we are getting really old. There was an expletive in front of that, and and then there's always been, through my whole career, new emerging booksellers, but they tend to be singular. They were like kind of these extraordinary events. And so not that long ago, let's call it less than 10 years ago, that we're starting to see an emergence of a whole cohort of the next generation of bookselling. And I think it's one of the things that Jeff speaks to, and what Seminary has been doing as a bookstore, how to address the issue of how do we make bookselling a vocation that's not economic suicide for those who kind of choose to do this. And it's how we look at the various models to make our not just the stores, but the people, the staffs are essential. Every good bookstore, the basis of that goodness is the staff. And so, and it's the economic circumstances today for a bookseller are so different from when I started, like 50 years ago. And but it is there. There's a cohort now that I haven't seen since the 70s, and it's of like this a real generation of dedicated booksellers whose enthusiasm and knowledge and curiosity is unparalleled. And with the added bonus is that they also take the vocation of bookselling, also that it requires to pay attention to the business aspects of what we do.
Yeah, I'm finding a lot of hope in the fact that we're all still here. I think that we've watched for 10, 15, 20 years the doom and gloom articles of like the bookstore is dying, and we had the rise of the chains, and we had the rise of Amazon and e-readers and all, and then the coronavirus, like we had this pandemic that literally removed us from the physical spaces that defined us as entities. And instead of abandoning us during that time, our customers and our communities doubled down in a really meaningful way. And they looked around, and I think we saw a lot of restaurants and other community spaces closing and in real peril. And our communities looked around and they said, what do we want our world to look like at the end of this? And they all very, very vocally said, we want our bookstores here. And they continued to shop with us, and they continued to support us. And, I live in Seattle, we're the land of Amazon. And I've never seen so much support for independent bookstores as I do now. And it's really magical to watch. And again, it's hopeful. I think we are doing the right thing for our communities, and they're letting us know that right now. So that's been as terrible as the last 2 years have been in so many ways. I find a lot of hope in where we're at and where our communities have shown their support.
Yes.
So
I think I find a lot of hope in our community's response. Sometimes we get, purchases and attention from other places, and we're very grateful for that. But when people either come in or call us and say they miss us, or they don't know how to use the computer, could you send me this book? It's just, there's so much joy. It's like, are you kidding me? Yeah, we're going to send you the book. So, there's just hope that if we keep maintaining these good relationships with people about books, then we can help them to find the books they need and have the conversations with us that enrich both of us.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful thinking of the hopefulness of being both meeting communities where they are, of thinking ahead and thinking about futures of bookselling that build sustainable financial models that can support the next generation of booksellers and of bookstores, and doing that all whilst really excitedly kind of hitting that drum and very enthusiastically appreciating the spaces we all inhabit, and the work that each of these stores and every store we frequent gets to do is, to me is like the most hopeful and the most reflective too of what this bookselling community is all about. And the kind of, in thinking about abundance, this was a wonderfully abundant conversation. And I'm so thankful to you three for your time and your perspective and your deep-seated enthusiasm, which as probably everyone on this call knows is not unique to us, right? It's unique to an entire industry of folks, and it truly is the future of books and the future of bookstores. So thank you all. I will turn it back over to Peter to kind of conclude us here.
Thank you, Clancy.
There was so much resonance for this session. It was awesome listening to all of you. Thank you, Clancy, for the interlocution. Thank you, Kim, Alyson, of course, Paul, for sharing your experiences. I mean, it is a real honor to be able to call you colleagues. You've each contributed so much to the trade, and so much gratitude to you all for your work. I mean, you're truly what my definition, think my definition is of a superhero. So I'd like to also thank all of you in the audience for joining us and having an interest in books. Our final session is coming up at 2 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Central, and 5 p.m. Eastern. It is called The Future of Books, the Building of Communities. So we hope to see you there. I want to remind you, we've posted links in the chat function on your Zoom dashboard with which you may still purchase copies of In Praise of Good Bookstores. Also, links to all of our booksellers' websites. Today's event has been made possible by support from the City Lights Foundation, continuing the legacy of our founder, the late Lawrence Ferlinghetti, through public events, publishing programs, and educational outreach dedicated to sustaining a vibrant community of readers, writers, and independent thinkers. So be well, everyone. Hope to see you for that final session.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
you.